Okay, I think we have plenty of people here. We're going to start. Welcome everybody this Saturday morning, November 6th, 2021 to the Effective Governance Workshop. And I really want to thank all of you for giving up part of your Saturday morning and most of all for serving Concord. All of you have so much talent, experience, and enthusiasm for our town, and we really couldn't function without you. You're the heart and soul of this town. So I really, really want to thank all of our committee members, and thank you for making time today. Hopefully this workshop will make your jobs easier because you'll know all of the rules and all the technology that you need to know. We will try to allow a little bit of time for Q&A in each section, but we may have to have people continue offline because we're trying to get everything finished in 2 hours. So as you know, we have 4 sessions today. We're going to have a very brief session on Zoom and hybrid meeting guidelines from Chris Carmody of the town office. After that, we will have a long session from our town clerk, Kari Tari, who is going to present ethics, open meeting rules and laws, and public compliance. Then we will have a session from our moderator, Carmen Reese, about town meeting. We will wrap up with a very brief session on cybersecurity from our IT director, Jason Bulger. So without further ado, let's get started with Chris Carmody and the Zoom and hybrid meeting guidelines. And this is only going to go about 10 minutes. There probably will be unanswered questions at the end. So if each speaker could please state at the end of your session how people should get in touch with you if they have additional comments and questions. Chris Carmody, take it away.
Hi, good morning. My name is Chris Carmody. I'm the administrative manager in the town manager's office. I wear many hats. One of them is scheduling Stephen's time. I am also the town's, you might call it a dedicated Zoom manager. So there's, as you know, a lot of different aspects to Zoom. Today, we're going to be presenting on a hybrid meeting, and we're going to do a little bit of review. So let me pull up my slides. Okay, can everyone see the slides?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so just by way of review, Governor Baker issued an order suspending certain provisions of open meeting law. That's MGL 30A section 20. And there are a lot of things that order did in 2020, but really the two most important parts for purposes of our conversation today are that it suspended the requirement the public bodies meet in the public place provided the public access to the body's deliberations is available through adequate alternative means. Also, it suspended the requirement that a quorum, as you all know by now, be physically present. The town issued a series of policy directives starting in April 1, 2020 for remote meeting of public bodies, and subsequently provided an update on May 7, 2020, and the most recent one was on September 8, 2021. Each of which was presented to the select board on or about the date of its issuance. As we all know, the governor rescinded the emergency order in June 2021 and signed into law an act extending certain COVID-19 measures. With that act primarily continued the suspensions described above. The bodies may meet remotely and quorum need not be physically present. The Mass Attorney General has provided extensive advice about this on their website. and issued guidance on June 16, 2021. I will let my colleague in the town clerk's office talk more about posting of agendas. Just by way of a very quick reminder, it's 48 hours in advance. You have to account for holidays and weekends. And the OML provisions, the new law does not change the requirement that each committee create accurate minutes, and it must state whether the meeting is going to be met in person, remote, or hybrid. The Attorney General has clarified what adequate alternative means which includes, this is not an exhaustive list, provide live access through Zoom, Facebook Live, YouTube Live, and live TV, including local cable access, which the town does. So the hybrid meeting guidelines, right now, over the last few months, the town has really expanded its capability to meet in hybrid, which is combining in-person and Zoom meetings. At the same time, there are still some Zoom kind of guidelines that are still in effect, which is that the chair is responsible for determining the meeting location and posting the agenda. The chair is also responsible for determining the way that the committee meets, whether it's exclusively over Zoom or exclusively in person or hybrid. The Attorney General's guidance is also very clear that the committee may decide to meet in person exclusively and require remote public participation. The chair is responsible for ensuring that each remote committee member's name is announced. Sometimes they allow that to do each committee member to do that themselves. All votes must be taken by roll call, and all committee members must be clearly audible, not necessarily visible to each other and members of the public. Just by way of review, the open meeting law does not require that public bodies allow public comment or public participation during meetings. To the contrary, the open meeting law specifies that nobody shall address the public body without permission of the chair. In terms of protocol and conduct, the chair is responsible for obtaining a Zoom link, which include the unique meeting ID and passcode. Also, for determining whether the committee meets in person or hybrid or over Zoom. The meeting will get recorded on Zoom. It's sent to town staff. Staff send that to Minuteman Media, where they edit and publish the meeting on the town's YouTube site. Certain executive committees like the Select Board, School Committee, Finance Committee, and Planning Board are live broadcast upon the request of the chair. And for anyone who has trouble accessing the meeting, sometimes there has been some technical challenges where the Zoom link may have gotten caught in the town's spam filter. So the hyperlink, especially in this day and age, the hyperlink is a little bit of a trigger for different software. Sometimes if you convert the Word into Adobe, it interferes with the Zoom, with the link itself. So for anyone who's having trouble accessing the meeting, a surefire way to access the meeting is just to go to zoom.com and enter in manually the meeting ID and passcode. Just by way of review, in terms of conduct, the expectations have been pretty clear since we started meeting on Zoom in March 2020, that each member should try to find a quiet place with power and internet to attend the virtual meeting. You want to try and test your speakers and microphone before the meeting starts. Test speaker mic on your Zoom program. Committee members should activate their camera. Members of the public are encouraged to activate their camera when they're recognized by the chair. And then in terms of specific conduct and in adherence with the town's policy directive issued on September 8th, 2021, each committee member and member of the public is expected to adhere to a standard of respect and courtesy towards other committee members and town staff. For hybrid meeting locations, right now we've got 4. We have the townhouse, the public hearing room. We've got 55 Church Street in the basement. We have the first floor of the conference room in the planning department at 141 Keyes Road. And we have the public meeting room in the municipal light plant. And our thanks go out to the IT department for working so hard and quickly to scale up the capability. These are really the only places right now that have the power, the acoustic conditions, and the meeting space that allow for a hybrid meeting to occur. So there have been times where we've seen a hybrid outside of these locations, and it just does not serve the public well. There's either audio connection problems or power connection problems that interfere with the process of the meeting. And so we, for chairs that are interested in having a hybrid meeting, that goes through the town manager's office, and we are involved in helping to schedule the room and kind of making sure that the Zoom meeting lines up with the physical space requirements. We will be posting this slide deck later today on the website, so people have all this information and contact information for the schedulers of these sites. And that's it. Any questions?
Okay, thank you so much, Chris. We have over 60 people participating, so we may not get to all the questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand clearly. I see Stephen Crane wants to ask a question, probably not, probably add a few words. And then our first question looks like it's from Carlin Reed. Go ahead, Stephen.
Yeah, I think, good morning, everyone. And I just want to add, I think Chris touched on it, but I think it's important to remember that, the town is currently under, excuse me, a mask advisory. And so for the people who are meeting in person, in a hybrid meeting model or an in-person meeting model, it's not a requirement to have masks in the spaces. It is an advisory. So each chair, when contemplating how to call a meeting, should be aware of the current Board of Health orders on mask wearing. I think if you're able to, use a larger room, I don't think there's anything wrong with spreading out, so long as the camera and the audio work, and meeting without masks. I think I've seen committees do it both ways, and it can be effective either way. The important thing is to protect each other's health and safety, but just be mindful of what the mask advisories or orders are when you're scheduling that.
Thank you, Stephen. That's an important reminder. Okay, our first question is from Carlin Reed, and I'm going to ask questioners to be brief. If you have a question after Carlin, please raise your virtual or physical hand. Go ahead, Carlin.
Thank you, Terry. Carlin Reed, Chair of the PEG Access. As you probably know, I'm all about video. I've been getting some complaints from folks about committees not sending their videos promptly to MMN. So I'm reminding you, please record your videos and send it promptly to MMN, because people are actually watching what you do. And thank you again for doing good jobs on the videos. That's it.
Thanks, Carlin. That's true. I've recently been out of town, so it's really been great to have the videos. And I know a lot of people watch them. Thank you so much. Linda Escobedo and Chris Reynolds.
Yeah, thank you, Terry. I just want to, even though the OML technically does not require public comment, I just want to note that, it's considered best practice that committees allow for public comment. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Linda. And we have Chris Reynolds and then Diane Proctor.
Thanks, Terry. So I just had a question, if perhaps others have some advice, but any advice on hearings? So we did public hearings last year completely over Zoom. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. We have an important hearing coming up that the FinCom will run mid-December for a special town meeting. And I was just curious if you, Terry, or Chris Carmody or others have some advice around if we wanted to run that hearing, either, I guess, in hybrid or in person.
You mean advice as to which way to run it?
Yeah, or a suggestion, right? You know,
Mm-hmm.
is it going to run better one way or another? We had mixed results last year on hearings, so I was just curious if anybody had any advice for me on that.
Chris?
Terry, if sorry, I was.
Oh, Stephen.
Go ahead, Chris. Chris is really the master of all this, and he's done when he started with the governor's order back in March. None of this capacity existed in the town of Concord, and now we're doing it every day. So I do want to give credit to Jeremy and Chris for really, and Jason Bulger as well for really making this happen. But I have my thoughts on this, but Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's a few things I would recommend. One is to talk for chairs, to talk with your committee members and see what they're hearing and what they prefer. The second is with Zoom, as we all know, there are two different platforms. There's a Zoom meeting and a Zoom webinar. And the Zoom webinar, we have received, candidly, complaints that meeting attendees cannot see each other unless they're on the panel. And that has been a little bit of a source of frustration for attendees. I will say that the town, for the last 2 town meetings, has run public hearings for town meeting on the webinar, and they have been successful. So I think that just like going to your doctor, when you ask them, is there anything wrong? And they say no, that's kind of the standard we're looking at with the webinar. Where did we see progressive dialogue? Did we see actions taken? Was there a concerted effort for the public to weigh in on an issue? And was the meeting Zoom bomb? So I think there's been a little bit of discussion about how quickly it is to remove a Zoom bomber and how slight an interference is on that meeting. And I would beg to differ with that assessment. What we do in the town manager's office is try to create the conditions for progressive open dialogue. And when someone Zoom bombs an event, it's not just a security incident. It is an intrusion on the public deliberation of the matter at hand. And it just sets things back. So when chairs decide whether to do a webinar or a meeting, they aren't just talking about the security incident. They are talking about what sort of risks are there and how do they try to protect the meeting so that the dialogue can happen. Also, Chris, just to the third point, and that's an excellent point, is that public hearings are carved out in open meeting law, and they are the requirements for a public hearing are different than a public meeting. And I, unfortunately, am not an expert on the public hearing legal technical requirements that are governed by the Attorney General, and perhaps Kari may have some more guidance on that.
Right.
But
okay.
There are kind of commitments to ensure during a public hearing that the public is heard.
Right. Thank you very much, Chris. We will be hearing more from Kari in a couple minutes. I see there's 2 more questions, if you could be very brief. And then if you have more questions after that, please get in touch with Chris. Chris will be publishing all his slides also on the website. So our last 2 questions, Diane Proctor, did you have a brief question?
Actually didn't. It was an applause sign for Linda's of participation and asking the citizens to participate. So,
all right, super, thank you. And then I see Molly Aline has a question.
I'm asking in the spirit of inclusion. There seems to be a lot of inside speak and acronyms being thrown around. Not all of us are members of government and know what these things mean. And so if you guys could either like say the full name of the organization or the group that you're referring to, so us non-insiders know what's happening, that would be really great.
Thank you, Molly. And that's a great segue. There's an acronym OML, which means Open Meeting Law. And there are lots of rules about that Kari, our town clerk, is going to be going over now. She's going to be talking about ethics, open meeting law, and public records compliance. I think that's going to include also stuff about the public hearings. Okay, Kari, thank you for doing this workshop. take it away. Oh, and one more comment. If everyone else could please be on mute so we don't have any interference. Thanks. Kari, we don't hear you. Maybe you are on mute.
Yes, I was on mute. Sorry about that. I was asking if everyone could see my screen. So thank you, Terry, and board and committee members and the public. I want to say at the start of this that no committee meeting has been posted today because we're talking about process and not committee business. And as Terry mentioned, this workshop is being recorded. So I'm doing a deeper dive into some things related to your work as a committee member and your work in running meetings, but it is by no means comprehensive because there is just so much material to be covered. So whether you're new to a committee or your committee is new or you're being reappointed, your term of office begins when you accept your appointment, and you do that by taking the oath of office at the town clerk's counter. You'll receive a committee handbook that has all the legal summaries, laws, regulations, education materials, and town policies that you may need to refer to in the course of your committee work. We will direct you to a memo in that handbook that explains the acknowledgements that you need to return and also includes the link to the online ethics training. Hopefully, if you're on a committee, you have done all those things. We do track that information. These acknowledgements and online training are mandatory for a very good reason. You're all dedicated to serving the town in the capacity of your appointment, but you don't want your committee work to be undermined because the process laid out by these laws weren't followed. You should also have a copy of your committee's charge to understand the scope and authority of your committee's function. The committee handbook, acknowledgement forms, and the websites for the agencies that enforce these laws and regulations are accessible online from the town clerk's page or from any browser using the URL at the bottom of this screen. This, I'll say, is only a partial screenshot of the page. And today's, both the recording and all of the slide material will be on this page by the end of today. So I'm going to speak only briefly about the conflict of interest law because while it's extremely important to understand in the scope of your committee work, it is also very personal. Every situation is different. So I would suggest that you complete the conflict of interest online training before attending your first meeting, if possible. It's important to understand that if your work life or private life intersects in any way with town business, even if it's not with your committee, you need to find out if you have a conflict or appearance of conflict. The Ethics Commission is staffed by attorneys, and a chat with the attorney of the day will provide you with free legal advice that may lead to filing a disclosure form with your appointing authority and possibly recusing yourself from participating in deliberation on that project or issue. You cannot use your position to gain favor or financial benefits for you or an immediate family member. The Ethics Commission posts public enforcement decisions on their website under several categories, some of which are listed here. And as I said before, it's not limited to actual conflict. The appearance of conflict of interest is often as damaging as an actual conflict. It's complicated. So if you think you might have a conflict, get advice before a potential violation occurs. I get calls from committee members asking what to do if they think they have a conflict, and I always refer them to the Ethics Commission. Remember that they will not advise me about your potential conflict, and their advice is always confidential.
Kari, can I just interrupt for 1 second?
Yes.
You mentioned that before starting, committee members should take the conflict of interest ethics test. Could you please include the link for that when you post all this other material? We have
that. Thank you. That is actually on the website now under the board and committee web page that is accessed from the town clerk's office. So that link is there. It's a training rather than a test because there's no failing the test. If you guess wrong, you keep guessing till you get to the right answer. And there's an explanation of why that may not be the right, or even it may be right, but not the best answer.
Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. So moving on to the open meeting law. This law sets the parameters for getting committee work done. It ensures transparency in the deliberations on which public policy is based. The educational materials include the guide, the law, regulations, and very helpful checklists. It's a lot of material to review, but it's critical to understanding how to properly post, conduct, and make a record of governmental meetings. So let's plan a meeting. In order to hold a public meeting, you have to first post an agenda. If you're not sure what to include in the agenda, there is, as I mentioned, a checklist in the committee handbook from the Division of Open Government that is very detailed. Besides the when and where, it's important to include enough detail that a reasonable person would know what to expect at a meeting. In other words, should they attend? For instance, don't just say you'll be reviewing a report. Indicate the name of the report. What is it about? Why are you reviewing it? If you're accepting minutes, indicate the date of the minutes. It's okay not to include detail about a public forum agenda item because you can't anticipate what the public will say. However, when significant new topics arise under public forum, you should consider scheduling that item for a future meeting to allow proper notice and full discussion. If your meeting has to move to a new location, you need to post the new location at the meeting location that has changed, and you may need to delay the start of the meeting, depending on how far the new meeting location is for the original one. This may happen if you find out that you're going to have a larger turnout for a meeting than you had anticipated, because there is a high interest item on your agenda. Once you create your agenda, you have to post it publicly in order to legally hold the meeting. The public posting needs to happen at least 48 hours, and that does not include weekends or holidays, as Chris mentioned earlier, before the meeting. If you have regularly scheduled meetings, send us the dates to add to the online calendar. This will help us, and it will also help you to remember to forward that agenda. And give us time. The 48-hour notice minimum is to the public, so it has to be on the website. The town clerk's office needs to get the posting sooner so that we have enough time to comply with the law. If you give us 15 minutes, if you give us an hour before the meeting, we may not see your email until that 48-hour clock is passed. So for an example on posting dates, a typical Monday meeting has to be posted by Thursday. 24 hours from Thursday is Friday, and 24 hours from Friday, not including the weekend, is Monday. Normally a Tuesday meeting has to be posted by Friday. But if the Tuesday meeting follows a Monday holiday, it has to be posted by the previous Thursday. And the date of your agenda has to be clear. I'll give you a recent example where I neglected to update the day of the week for a meeting that was being held for the registrars. So instead of Friday, October 22nd, I had kept a previous agenda posting of Wednesday, October 22nd. I checked with the Division of Open Government just to be sure, especially since I'm giving the training and advising people, because I wanted to know if it would be valid, since the date was correct, but the day was wrong. But because I had noticed the error less than 48 hours before the meeting, I was told that because the original posting could lead to confusion, I should reschedule the meeting. It was frustrating, to say in the least, but I understand the notice has to be clear. If there is any room for confusion, then it's better to delay. Now, the best practice to get your agenda posted on time is to forward, of course, your agenda early. Remember that for the sake of transparency, more detail is better. Most of you email your agendas, so if you create it electronically, name your file something meaningful. Our municipal archivist, Nate Smith, recommends entering the year first in the date so that you can sort it more easily. Include the word agenda and your committee name. Once the agenda is posted, it may be changed in less than 48 hours before the meeting if the chair did not reasonably anticipate the agenda item that is being added earlier. When you make such a change, you need to note it on the amended agenda so that when we upload it to the web, it is clear for people. When we upload an agenda to the web and we upload subsequent agendas to the web, it always shows as a new agenda so that people can see previous agendas. They can also see the date and timestamp that is automatically set by Civic Plus, which is the web service that we use. So they can see that the agenda was posted in a timely manner. For new committees, at your first meeting, your first order of business is to elect a chair and a clerk. It is recommended also that the committee elect a chair and a clerk annually. The chair sets the agenda and runs the meeting while the clerk keeps a record of the meeting. Anyone may propose agenda items, but the chair has the ultimate discretion over the final agenda. Committee members may not deliberate outside of a posted meeting, but discussing the date and location of a meeting is not considered deliberation. Forwarding an agenda item is also not considered deliberation as long as there is no opinion accompanying the agenda item. A quorum is a simple majority of the established membership of the public body, unless otherwise provided in a general or special law or other provision. This is from the Division of Open Government. If you don't have a quorum, you don't have a meeting. Without a quorum, you aren't deliberating on committee business, you will make no committee decisions, and you will not have minutes. A quorum at a social event is not deliberating about committee matters and does not need to be posted. And as I said before, today's workshop is not about your committee business, it's about process. So no posting for your committee is needed. So there's often confusion between what a subquorum is and a subcommittee. If you don't have a quorum, you are having a conversation. In a subcommittee, however, the committee has designated more than one person to work on an assignment. A subcommittee can be formed intentionally or inadvertently. If two people are assigned to create a report that they will present to the full committee at a later time, those two people constitute a subcommittee because they have been assigned by the committee and they're doing committee business. If only one person is assigned to create a report to present to the committee, then there is no subcommittee because only one person has that responsibility. An individual working on a report or a project can consult with someone else, whether it's a member of the committee or someone outside of the committee. As long as that person hasn't been assigned to the project, and as long as they don't reach a quorum or inadvertently reach a quorum through serial communication. This is something that I get asked about a lot, and it can happen quite inadvertently. So when a committee is discussing a project, if it's something that clearly would need more than one person to accomplish the task, to assign only one person to the task and assume that they will bring other committee members in is not really assigning one person to the task. So you have to be realistic when you're thinking about who can help to get committee work done outside of a committee. So let's talk about serial communication. This can happen very easily via email, social media, or any other means of communication. As soon as a quorum is reached with a communication relating to committee business, an open meeting law violation has occurred if it is not conducted in open session. This includes edits to documents, such as minutes or reports. One person should get the edits and share a compiled copy of the edits at a meeting or post it online prior to the meeting. This way, all information flows in one direction. Some ways to avoid this accidental serial communication via email is to use blind copy when sending information, again, without opinion, such as agenda items. The entire point of the committee is to do its work in plain view of the public. So you can see here a subquorum discussion among 2 members of a 5-member body is, so you don't have a quorum, it's only between 2 people and it goes no further. It's when you add, whether you tell one person and they tell someone else on the committee, or you tell 2 people independently, you've still reached a quorum of 3 people if you're a 5-member committee. Serial communication also applies to subcommittees. If it's a 2-member subcommittee, every meeting of that subcommittee has to be posted. So how do you get work done? The wheels of government turn slowly, but as a resident with interest in town government, you can appreciate this from the public side of the table too, I'm sure. It's all about process. So while you can't invite your entire committee to edit a report on Google Docs because edits constitute opinion and opinion is deliberation, there are ways to independently get work done to a point that you can have effective deliberation and reach a point of agreement within reasonable time. I do mention site visits on this slide, and a lot of committees don't have them, but just so that you know, site visits aren't required to be posted, but then you can only view and take notes. You can't actually have discussion, even in the form of questions to an applicant. It's another challenge. So how do you get committee work done? You can bring efficiency and transparency closer together by delegating the work among individual members of a committee and then reporting back. Posting a meeting packet along with your agenda, which is something that's done by regulatory and policymaking boards, can really help you move the process along. By posting the material online, you're opening the door to public process. And this also allows committee members to review the work before a meeting. Don't try to work around open meeting law, rather see what you can do within the boundaries of what is transparent. Most committees don't need to hold executive sessions at all. But if you do, executives sessions, you need to know, are excluded from public participation, but they're allowed for very limited reasons. There are 10 purposes that are listed in your committee handbook. And there's also a checklist to make sure that your committee enters into executive session properly. The meeting agenda must include as much detail as circumstances allow. And one of the 10 purposes needs to be cited. The meeting always starts in open session, and there's very specific language that the chair must use when entering executive session. That is also in the checklist. If you've never held an executive session and you think that you need to hold one, please contact your appointing authority to be sure about this. As Chris mentioned at the beginning of this workshop, remote participation is allowed until April of 2022. Conducting a remote meeting requires that all committee members are accounted for audibly, all votes are called by roll, and while meetings must be accessible, they're not required to be recorded. If they are being recorded, an announcement must be made. But to Carlin's point, having meetings recorded is really helpful, because one thing that we've seen in the town clerk's office is that meetings have multiplied. So Thursdays seem to be big meeting days where we can have upwards of 11 meetings happening in one day. It is near impossible for people to attend all these meetings, and this is a very active town and people want to know what's happening in town government. Sometimes minutes take a while to become public, so how do people know what happened at the meeting? So really do think about recording your meetings if you're holding them remotely. And of course, minutes are required for meetings of all governmental bodies, regardless of the format of the meeting. So the remote participation policy that exists, that existed pre-COVID and will exist post-COVID, unless there are more permanent legislative changes, allow that only one member of the meeting participates remotely. So this is again back when we are in person, fully in person. In that case, remote participation can't be used to establish a quorum. And that one person who is participating remotely cannot chair the meeting. The person who is going to be remote would have to let the chair know 48 hours in advance, and all votes must be roll call votes. When we get back to physical meetings, then I'm sure we'll be sending out a reminder about this. So how do you keep the meeting on track? So we've established the when and how you can hold a meeting. And it's important to maintain control of the meeting. Remember that the chair has the authority to run the meeting, call the meeting to order, follow the agenda. Ask the person proposing the agenda item what action they hope to receive from the board. Before the meeting, think about how much time should be allotted to each agenda item. If an agenda item will bring a lot of public comment, you may wish to limit comment time to 1 or 2 minutes per person rather than being selective as to who can comment. And remember that if you allow for public comment, you don't have to respond to the comment other than to acknowledge it. And while you've invested time and energy into your committee work, please don't take comments personally. So when we talk about public meetings, as was mentioned before, the public does not have to be recognized to speak. It's up to the chair to recognize speakers. but it's a good idea to recognize the public to speak. In a public hearing, the chair will open the public hearing. Generally, the public hearing has to be posted. How far in advance of the public hearing is determined by law. Planning Board and Zoning Board of Appeals, regulatory boards have their rules of when the public hearing has to be published, and abutters have to be notified because it's land-based. When the Select Board holds public hearings for things like street acceptance, there are other rules that are involved. So if you need to hold a public hearing, it's good to check in with the appointing authority and town departments, to town manager's office or the department that supports your board or committee, or the town clerk's office, and we will find out the information for you. And remember that the purpose of the hearing is for public input, not deliberation. And the committee will close the public hearing before proceeding with a vote. Meeting minutes, as I said before, whether they're public meetings or executive session, you have to make a record of what you discussed in detail and the exact wording of any votes that you take. These minutes are the official record of the meeting. They're permanent and they have great historic value. Drafting minutes and getting them approved may take a few minutes because you cannot discuss them or share edits outside of a meeting. As I mentioned earlier, members may receive a draft, make edits, and submit them to one person who will compile them for the next meeting. This keeps the process public. And the timing, minutes need to be approved within 3 meetings or 30 days, whichever is later. If there is a public records request for minutes, draft minutes should be created as soon as possible, because there is a legal requirement to respond to a public records request within 10 business days. So best practices for meeting minutes, there is a checklist. Of course, the Division of Open Government, in trying to help us not violate the open meeting law, has a lot of checklists. You need to have enough information that a reasonable person would have a good idea of what happened at the meeting. You don't have to have a transcript, but it needs to be enough information that someone will understand what happened. Documents that are either discussed or referenced at the meeting need to be listed in the minutes and kept for 6 months. And then they have their own retention value after that. Approved minutes should be forwarded to your appointing authority and the town clerk. And remember that reports created by and for your committee are also permanent documents. If you have a temporary committee that dissolves, once you have completed your charge, these records should be turned over to the town clerk's office. It's actually to the municipal archivist through the town clerk's office. Very briefly about complaints. Complaints relate directly to compliance with the open meeting law. It's about process. The remedy is to address the flaw in the process. The complaint process is formal. There is an official form that needs to be used. The complaint is filed within 30 days directly with the board or committee. The board or committee has to respond within 14 days to the complaint. And then if the complainant is not satisfied with the response, they can appeal that to the Division of Open Government. When you respond to the complainant, it's helpful to also forward that to the town clerk's office so we have a record of it, or the appointing authority. Because if we get further information from the Division of Open Government, if this continues, it's helpful for us to know, and we can help possibly resolve it. There is a remedy. The open meeting law has on their website training videos, which are broken down into sections. The most recent one is from March of 2018, and we know that with COVID, there have been updates. There's also a transcript available for the videos. Open meeting law contact information. This is also on our website. And now let's look at public record law and how that relates to committee records. A public record is a communication in any form, including emails, texts, tweets, phone calls, Facebook posts that relate to official government business. Parts of the Public Records Law Guide and Public Records Access Guidelines for Concord are included in your handbook because your email and meeting notes could be subject to the public records request. Materials discussed or referred to at a meeting has to be kept for 6 months because it could be subject to a public records request. Now, not all public records requests, or public records rather, are subject to disclosure. There are, however, very specific exemptions that you would have to refer to in responding to a records request where something is not available or something needs to be redacted. So the first record book here that you see was kept by the overseers of the poor. It was begun in 1879. You, the public, have records created by boards and committees before you that date back to the 17th century and are still referred to today. It's important to be accurate and to be aware of the historical value of the records that you're creating. All the records created by and for your committee are public records and they belong to the town. Many of these records are permanent, so they need to be preserved. This is why you need to forward minutes, reports, correspondence, and other committee-related material to your department that's supporting your committee or to the town archivist through the town clerk's office. A public records request can be any form of communication, but only a written request may be appealed to the supervisor of public records. As I said before, we have to respond within 10 business days. If we don't have the material, then we need to explain why and have until 25 business days to provide the material requested. A public records request is a formal request. So it's important that you let the staff person for your committee or your appointing authority or the town clerk's office know. In conclusion, let's remember that committee work is official and public business and has to be conducted and documented with that in mind. It's important to work in cooperation with your appointing authority and town staff, as well as other committees, as your committee charge may require or as the need arises. You are doing important work for the town, and I thank you and want to remind you that the town clerk's office and other town offices are here to support you in the important work you do. And if you feel at any point that your committee might benefit from some additional training, please contact the town clerk's office and we will make that happen. And with that, I'll take questions.
Thank you so much, Kari. That was a lot of material. And I see there are a lot of new people here who have not been on town committees before. So we could have a number of questions. We have about 20 minutes or so for questions, so that's good. Please raise your virtual or your real hand if you have a question. I see there's 4 people already, and try to be brief, and we'll see how many questions we can get through. So our first question is from Lois Wassoff and then Mary Hartman.
Hi, Carrie, thank you. That was really a really clear presentation. One thing that occurred to me watching it is you talked about the restrictions on remote attendance that will come back into force after April of 2022. And I just wanted to confirm something with you that is my understanding. The town select board adopted a policy at some point which actually puts additional restrictions above and beyond the state law. One of those restrictions that is town-based rather than in the state law, as I understand it, is the limitation to 1 person responding remotely. I'm on the FinCom, which has 15 members. So a 1-person limitation to remote participation, when and if that comes back into force, is going to be a much bigger problem for FinCom than it might be for a committee that has 5 or 6 members. So I just wanted to mention that the presentation, which was great, didn't distinguish between, to my mind, between what restrictions come directly from state law and what restrictions are town-based and therefore might be subject to additional review by the select board if it chooses to.
That's a very good point. And it is certainly, policy is something that the select board can revisit. And while the state law does allow for more than 1 person to participate remotely, we don't know if state law is going to change by April of 2022. So because remote access has so many benefits, there may be further changes to the law.
Hi,
so I would say hold.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Also, Lois, I'm sorry. Do you mind just describing what exactly the policy is that you're talking about?
The town adopted a policy on remote participation that sits sort of as a layer on top of the state law. So there are some places where the town's policy, which is select board adopted and could be revisited if it chose to by the select board, where additional requirements are added. There are a couple of them. The one that comes to mind that was triggered by Carrie's presentation is the one that limits the remote participants in any committee member to 1 member, at any committee meeting to 1 member of the committee. That isn't in the state law. It comes to us through the town policy.
Okay, Lois, I think this is a really excellent point, and I think you and Chris and I should talk about this offline. Kari is correct. The state is talking about extending it anyway past April and making it permanent, so it may be moot. I think Chris is probably talking about something in APP 10, but we can look it up and we can work on that. So thanks for bringing that to our attention. Next, we have Mary Hartman and then Farhana Sheets.
Thanks, Terry, and thank you, Kari. That was a very clear presentation. I have a question. I agree with your comment that recordings of the meetings are very helpful for people who want to stay informed but can't be at meetings in person. But what is the best way for someone to find a recording? I use the YouTube search engine, which really doesn't help me find what I'm looking for. So is there a central place or a person that we can contact when we want to see a recording of a specific meeting?
It looks like Carlin might have an answer to that.
Sure. Mary, I'm in charge of the PEG Access Advisory Committee, and I work with the Minutemen Media Studio on a regular basis. If you're trying to find something, you can't find it, you can always contact me. But the best person is, the studio is trying to create playlists by committee on the YouTube website that the town uses. So one place to check is to look under your committee's name under playlists for the Minuteman Media Network. If you have a problem with that, let me know. If you have a problem with that, station manager is Mark Polly. Erin Stevens in the town is the public information officer, but she's also in charge of the station. So you have a couple of recourse options. Good.
And you can also contact me and I can try to find out.
Yeah, sometimes there's a few days delay between the time the Zoom recording gets transmitted to MMN, they process it, put it on YouTube, and you can find the Minuteman Media Network YouTube channel directly through the Town of Concord website. There's a link to the YouTube channel there.
Thank you.
Sorry, I was on mute. Okay. Thank you, Mary, for that question, and Carlin and everyone for that answer. And we will go now to Farhana Sheets.
Hi, thank you. I'm Farhana Sheets. I am new to committee. And so I have a question about before the first meeting around the oath of office and having to do that in person. Is that something that I would need to schedule myself? Kind of what is the protocol or process around that to make sure that I actually get that done before my first meeting?
So calling us call the town clerk's office to schedule that. The building is open from 9 to 3, and myself or assistant town clerk Mary Lou Carney can administer the oath of office. And if you can't make those hours and there are a number of people at a committee and you're meeting in person, I am happy to swear people in at a meeting.
Those hours would work. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you. We have had a number of new committees formed in the last couple of months. So there are a number of people who probably have that same question. So thanks very much for that question and that answer. I don't see any additional questions and we have a few minutes. So I'm going to wait a minute and see. Okay, we have a question from Phil Posner.
Thank you, Kari. That was a great presentation. I wanted to go back to close to the beginning of your presentation with regard to communications between committee members or among committee members outside of a public hearing. If I understood your comments, communications between two members of a committee with respect to the subject matter of the committee's business is not a violation of the open meeting law, but communications among more than two members of the committee may be violations if the communications amount to a deliberation. Can you elaborate on what you mean by, or what the law means by, a deliberation, so we're clear on that point?
Yes, thank you. That's a really good question. Deliberation is anything that relates to the business of the committee. So if you are talking, and when you talk about 2 people and 3 people, I'm assuming that you're talking about a 5-member committee. And so the quorum is a majority of committee members that are allowed for the committee. So if you have a vacancy, you're still counting that seat in establishing your quorum. So if you have a 5-member board or a 4-member board and only 3 members are in seats and there's a vacant seat, you have 2 members become a quorum. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay. So if you are having in a 5-member committee, 2 people are having a conversation that relates to committee business. It relates to the charge. It relates to decisions that you will make or something within the realm of interest of your committee. Then 2 people discussing that is a conversation. You're you're not deliberating because you can't, because you don't have a quorum. If you have more than 2 people and you're talking about anything that will be coming up on an agenda, there is an official definition of all of these terms of quorum, of deliberation, in the open meeting law guide that is in your committee handbook that is also available online. This becomes very complicated because, you know, you can talk about an agenda among a quorum, but the minute you start inserting your opinion that I think this is important, or I really, you know, want to say something about this agenda, or that's too bad that this can't be, you know, done differently as a comment into the context of the agenda item, that becomes a problem, because now you're inserting your opinion into the agenda discussion. And it's something that the public has a right to know. You're representing, you're wearing your committee hat as soon as you're having a conversation about committee related subjects. You're no longer speaking in your individual capacity.
Thank you, Kari, for that clarification. And I believe, I'm not sure if I'm correct, but I believe that you are allowed to discuss scheduling when the meeting will take place, or whether it's going to be Zoom or hybrid, as long as you don't get into any content, opinions, etc. You know, should it be on Friday or Monday at 2 o'clock, period? Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. And we have a question now from Nick Pappas.
Yeah, Kari, your examples were all about a 5-person committee. Could you explain, in the case of a larger committee, say 7, how a 3rd person's involvement in discussions would be allowable?
So in a 7-person committee, a quorum is 4 people. So if you have less than 4 people discussing, you don't have a quorum.
Okay, so as long as it's not a deliberation, for instance, if it were just discussions about some brainstorming or something like that, about something that might come up as an issue the committee might want to address in the future, that might be allowed.
Only if you have, so if you're discussing why it's important to be discussed, and so you're bringing 2 things up. You're talking about 3 people, which is a subquorum in itself. So you can't deliberate with 3 people on a 7-person committee because you don't have the authority to deliberate until you have a quorum.
Right, so what could you discuss? Could you give an example?
So for a 3-person subquorum,
yes,
you can have a conversation.
About anything?
About anything.
Okay, that was
because
okay.
You're not right, because you're not acting as a committee, because you can't act as a committee.
Right. So if you wanted,
so you can't deliberate.
Right. So if 3 people just wanted to have a discussion about a topic, it has not come before the committee, and it's just something they want to explore, they can do that.
Yes.
Okay.
As long, now I'll throw another wrench in there. As long as they haven't been, it hasn't been discussed at a committee, why don't you 3 people go and discuss these things?
Right.
Because the minute you say that, you've created a subcommittee.
Right. Got it. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Do we have further questions? As Kari said, all of this material will be posted on the website. Okay, I see another question from Diane. Hold on 1 minute there, Diane. And Chris Carmody, where is all of this material going to be posted from today's session?
I think, as Kari said, it'll be posted on the town clerk's website.
All of it, including Carmen's talk and your talk, all the talks. Okay, great. Great, thank you. Okay, Diane Proctor.
Thank you very much, Terry. I'm the chair of the CPC, and we often assign a project to two people to go and study and consider and work together in analyzing a particular project. So are we only allowed to I mean, we can't discuss that during the meeting. We have to, the idea is that we prepare and think together about the best way to do something. Is that therefore a violation of the open meeting law, Kari? And how do we conduct those discussions?
Right, so when two people are assigned to work on something, you are a subcommittee. So you need to post meetings and have minutes of your discussions.
Diane, could you tell the people assembled what the CPC is and what it does briefly?
Oh. Thank you, Stephen. Good call. It's the commission. It's the Community Preservation Committee, and so we have not been doing that, Kari, and thank you very much. We will do so in the future.
Okay. Do we have any? We have time for one or two more questions if there are any. Okay, Nick Pappas, could you put your hand down, please? I think you don't have another question, I don't think. And we have two more questions and then we'll wrap up. Amanda Kahn is our new Sustainability Director. Welcome, Amanda. And then we'll have a question after that from Laura Davis.
Great, thank you. Mine is a follow-up to Diane's. That was, an honest mistake. There was a subcommittee formed. Are there steps that would need to be taken if something like that happened?
So that would be called a remedy, and a remedy is to prepare minutes as soon as possible. If something inadvertent has happened, the recovery is to make it public.
Okay, thank you. Laura Davis.
Hi there. I just wanted to clarify which communications, email, text message, etc., are public record. Is it when you've reached a quorum? It are communications between two committee members that's a sub-quorum? Are those public records? Just curious about that.
So a public record is anything that you communicate as a committee member to someone. So if someone made a public records request and asked for all emails from or to this person who is a committee member relative to a particular item that has come up before that committee, that all of those emails would be considered public record because it is a communication that you have done on behalf or for the committee.
When you say on behalf of the committee, is it just any issue related to committee business to anyone, regardless of whether they're on the committee or off the committee? And it's just like topically related, not necessarily, right. I'm a member of this committee and I'm saying this about this topic that we discussed at our last meeting. Just trying to understand the scope of that. Because for instance, for the Transportation Advisory Committee, is any email that I send to anyone that has the word school bus in it a public record? That's what I wanted to understand.
So when you have your committee hat on, when you are a member of a committee, then anything that would be coming before the committee that relates to committee business that you are communicating outward is a public record.
Maybe
because you have your committee hat on.
Yeah, so maybe I can illustrate that a little more for your example, Laura. If you say to somebody, "I'm going to be late. I had to put my kids on the school bus," that's not a public record. If you say we really need to figure out a better way to organize the drop off of school buses as a matter of transportation policy, then that would be a public record. One of the things a lot of people do on boards and committees is they set up like a Gmail account. So it'd be, Laura Davis, TAC, Transportation Advisory Committee at gmail.com. And so they keep all that stuff. If you email Chris about scheduling a hybrid meeting, that's a public record. And I think the thing with emails and texts is where it's the open meeting that usually gets people in trouble because they start expressing their opinions over emails to each other. And that's something to avoid.
But just to clarify, I think Laura is asking, I think your question, Laura, is if you email another person on the committee about school bus policy, that would be a public record. But if you email your neighbor who's not on the committee, your neighbor asks you a question about school buses, I don't think that's a public record.
If she's answering in the capacity of a committee member, then yeah, it is.
Right. If you're answering on behalf of the committee, then it's a public record. You just answering as a neighbor, and you're speaking as an individual, then I don't think it is a public record. So it gets a little tricky there.
It does get tricky. Yeah.
Okay. I think we have one more question from Phil Pappas, and then we're going to go to the next section on town meeting with Carmen. Go ahead, Phil, if you have another question.
It's a comment and a question. There seems to be a tradition in Concord of individuals who are members of committees making comments in public or in conversation, prefacing their comments saying something like, I'm saying this as a private citizen as opposed to being a member of the X committee. I'm wondering if the town has a policy or a guideline with respect to how people who are members of the committee express themselves on matters that are the subject matter of the committee, but completely outside of the context of the committee. So in discussing school buses on, and school bus schedules, committee members aren't forbidden from discussing that with third parties. They're not, they don't give up their First Amendment rights at the door. But I understand that committee members can't make comments as if they're members of the committee. So I'm wondering if the town has developed a policy or guideline so that it's clear and folks can follow it.
So let me just take a quick stab at that, Phil, and then I'll see what Stephen and Kari think. Usually that comment is made when the committee has not taken a position on a certain matter. And one particular person wants to express, let's say, a town meeting, it's not that the whole committee, I'm not speaking on behalf of my committee right now. I'm speaking as an individual, Terry Ackerman on East Bridge Road, because my committee has not voted on this matter. So that's when you usually hear that comment. So that's not exactly what you're asking, but it might relate. Stephen?
Yeah, I think, and I've heard that over the course of my career a lot. And I think, and Kari, if I have this wrong, please correct me, but once you get sworn in to be a member of a committee, you don't really get to decide when you're a committee member and when you're not. And so I think when you speak as a private citizen, you're still a member of the Transportation Advisory Committee, and things you're saying constitute you expressing your views as a member of that committee, even if you say you're expressing them as a private citizen. And so I think that Terry's right. It's more like if you show up to a hearing on a particular matter and you announce that I'm a member of the Transportation Advisory Committee, but I'm speaking on my own behalf, it means that the Transportation Advisory Committee didn't vote to authorize you to make a statement or didn't take a vote to express an opinion on a thing. And so you're not expressing the committee's opinion or statement, you're only expressing your own. But the things you say are still, they're still tied to your service on a committee, even if the subject matter isn't necessarily. That's my view of it, but I could definitely have that wrong.
Yeah,
I agree with that.
Correct. Mary Beth, if you have a very quick question, we will take it. And this is an absolute last question. And then if you have more questions, please contact Kari.
Yeah.
she's very accessible, and there are many questions on this complex.
Okay.
So
yeah,
I'm
not sure my question is quick. You can decide, and if it is not, I can follow up and talk about it with Carrie. But I'm soon to find myself as the liaison of one committee with another committee. Specifically, sorry, my video is weird. Specifically, I'm on the Commission for Disability, but it is being allowed that I also can be the liaison for the Commission on Disability with the Bruce Freeman Trail. And I was wondering how you thread that needle if I'm asked, as a committee member on the Bruce Freeman Trail, if I vote on an issue, am I voting? Am I making a decision about,
right.
I don't understand how
right.
it works.
Mary
It's something I need. Yeah.
My understanding is that you're going to be a full member on that
yes.
junction. So you will have voting rights. And if I'm wrong, somebody correct me, but you might want to discuss this offline.
Okay.
Well, just very quickly, there are liaisons to committees, and they are usually, or like the Finance Committee calls them, observers.
Okay.
And so liaison observer role. However, there are committees that are constituted specifically of people from other committees because of their knowledge, expertise, experience, jurisdiction. And Transportation Advisory Committee is kind of one of those where, a person may be on there specifically because they're a member of the Commission of Disabilities. That means they're a full committee member with full rights of participation in voting. And so make sure you know which role you're filling before the meeting. But if you're a liaison, it's really, you can certainly engage in the conversation. That's really up to the chair, but it's important to know. But if you're a member, you're a member. If you're a liaison, it's more an observational role.
I actually think I'm a member. I think you got that right, Terry, when you corrected me. I think I'm going to be a full member of both the commission and the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail Committee.
Right. That's
so
correct.
I do want to think about how this works in terms of,
okay.
open
So
meeting. Yeah.
I would urge you to talk with Kari then.
Yeah. Sure, I can do that.
Okay. Okay, so thank you. We are going to move on now. Kari, that was an excellent job trying to cram all that material into an hour. Really appreciate it. And again, I encourage everybody, if you do have specific questions like Mary Beth or general questions, Kari is an expert in this matter. Please contact her. And now we are going to move on to our moderator, Carmen Reese, who's going to share information with us about town meeting, including special town meeting, which we have coming up. Go for it, Carmen.
Thanks, Terry. I actually wasn't prepared to talk about special town meeting this morning, but rather about the annual town meeting process that involves all of the committees. But if there are questions about special town meeting, I can certainly answer those. Do you still want me to be done by 11:15? You're on mute, Terry.
How about 11:20 or so?
Yeah, okay. All right. Well, I'll do my best. I will try and talk fast. Okay. Can everybody see my screen okay? Yes? Okay, great. So, Concord relies very heavily on its citizen committees and boards as part of its government, as has really come across clearly this morning. And they are an integral part of our town meeting. And town meeting is not a single event or a single day. It is a process which involves a year's worth of budgeting and legislative action, and takes months and months of work and preparation by an awful lot of different people. So the process for town meeting really starts in August, goes through December, and we are working through the budget. We are working through the Community Preservation Act.
the planning board and to a lesser extent, the zoning board of appeals are working on zoning bylaw amendments. Individual committees may have articles that they wish to sponsor and bring before town meeting. And of course, citizens, we have a robust citizen petition practice here in Concord, and those are in process as well. So the cycle gets started with, once that preparation is underway, we have the preparation of the warrant. So this year that's happening in January and February. The town meeting preview meeting will be on January 8th. The warrant will open that day. And the warrant is going to close February 2nd, and everyone's draft articles will be due on January 28th. You should not be waiting until January to have your draft article. You should absolutely be working way before that, and feel free to contact me, your select board liaison, or your committee staff support in town with any questions or help that you need on that. The warrant will close at 4 o'clock on February 2nd this year. And once we have all the articles in, we go through the whole warrant with town council. The select board approves the order of the warrant and signs the warrant. The warrant gets printed, posted, and it gets mailed to every household. Then we start our hearing cycle. And this year, the select board will start off the hearings on February 28th, and the remainder of the hearings will happen in March. We have a very robust pre-town meeting hearing practice here in Concord, which is not necessarily the same in every town. Every single article that comes before town meeting will be the subject of a public hearing discussion before town meeting. And the finance committee has 3 hearings on different types of budget meetings. The planning board has 1 hearing, and the select board will have a hearing that addresses every warrant article that doesn't fit in somebody else's bucket. Once that cycle of hearings is completed, the consent calendar gets finalized. That falls to me as moderator to propose what will go on the consent calendar. I make those determinations through a lot of experience with past practice, but what's very important is the public reaction to things at hearings and how routine matters are. And then I bring that consent calendar as proposed to the select board to have a conversation with them about it. And we include the consent calendar in the finance committee report. The finance committee will be sending its report to the printer. All the motions have to be submitted. We then have a motions review meeting with town council. Finance committee report gets mailed to households. And then we begin the process of getting ready for the actual town meeting itself. I need to review all of the town meeting presentations and handouts before they are presented at town meeting. And then we have an annual town meeting presentation coordination meeting at which we discuss who's presenting on what and how long everyone will have to present on their various articles. And at that meeting, we also discuss whether particular boards and committees would like time to address a particular article with their recommendation, even if they aren't actually presenting the article. The last couple of years have been very strange town meetings because of COVID. I think this year we are likely to go back to a much more normal cycle like what we had before COVID, and that these meetings will happen probably either on Zoom or in a hybrid format. Okay, so the annual town meeting, the dates this year are May 1 through 4. These are now reserved in everybody's calendars. The PowerPoint presentations are all going to be approved and preloaded on the town's computers for the town staff to handle presenting those at town meeting. All handouts need to get approved, copied, delivered to town meeting. Everyone has rehearsed their speaking for town meeting and made sure that it fits within their time limit. And if there are any amendments, those have been vetted and prepared. And this is all done in April before we get to our town meeting in May. So the committee responsibilities for an article at town meeting. If your committee is developing an article and sponsoring an article, you need to develop that proposal within your own committee structure. That means observing the open meeting law. Important to take and consider public comment. This is so important to have a proposal that's really ready for prime time by the time you get to town meeting with it. The more advanced work you've done with the public, the better. Important to coordinate with other committees that might have an overlap in interest on whatever you are sponsoring. Great to get on their agenda for a conversation, come to their meeting to present, or ask otherwise for their input as a committee for your committee. When you're sponsoring an article, it becomes particularly important to keep your minutes up to date and posted because the public is watching, and people who are interested in a particular proposal really are following the committee meetings. And if they can't get to a meeting, they're looking at the minutes and they would like to have them on a timely basis. If you are thinking about proposing an article as a committee, you really want to talk to your select board liaison about that. There are only certain committees that have, as of right, the ability to place a matter on the warrant. It's the planning board, for example, has the right to do that by statute. Other than that, pretty much everything that goes on the warrant is there at the pleasure of the select board, unless it is a properly submitted citizen petition submitted by 10 voters. So you do want to be coordinating with your select board liaison to make sure everyone's on the same page. So if your article that you're proposing has a financial impact, then it will be your responsibility to figure out what kind of financial impact it will have on the town. If it needs an expenditure of funds, to identify the source of those funds. And if you have committee staff support, you'll want to talk with them about discussing funding issues with the town manager. And if you don't have staff support, then you'll want to talk with your appointing authority about funding issues. It's also really important to be in touch with your finance committee observer. Not every committee has a finance committee observer. If you don't have one, then you can contact the finance committee chair just to get on the finance committee's radar screen early enough if you have a proposal that involves money. Your proposed article will be done ideally by mid-November. You want to use staff support. You want to use select board liaison support. And sometimes a committee will ask for town council review of a proposed warrant article. That needs to be coordinated through the town manager, who is the gatekeeper on the expenditure of funds for legal services. And you can either ask your select board liaison to make that request or go directly to the town manager's office. And if your committee is proposing an article, sponsoring an article, you want to be prepared to talk about it at the town meeting, preview meeting in January. Okay, then again, if you're sponsoring an article, you'll want to finalize your article for the warrant. And just a word about process. The article is what gives notice to the voters when the warrant goes to everybody's house, and any voter can peruse the warrant and see what's going to be addressed as a matter of topic at town meeting. The article is not what we actually act on at town meeting. What we actually act on is a motion brought under the article. So the article gives notice. It usually has or take any other action relative thereto action that is in there, that is wiggle room language that allows us to vary a motion just slightly from what may appear in the warrant as a matter of notice, but not too much, has to be within scope. As I say, we are, let's see, we'll need our draft articles by January 28th. In the final article, if you get any comments back on it, warrant closes February 2nd, the language should be final by that. We do sometimes tweak slightly language after February 2nd, especially if town council advises that that should happen. But nothing can be changed in the article once the warrant goes to print. So if you are sponsoring an article, someone from your committee will present your article at the pre-town meeting hearing that it is taken up at. And think about that hearing as an opportunity to rehearse your presentation for town meeting. It's great to have your motion drafted in time for that hearing, but it's not required. And if you're doing PowerPoint slides for the hearing, there is an electronic presentation guideline and template that's available on the website under the town meeting tab, and you can download that and use it as your template for creating your slides. There are a lot of requirements about type size and color and so forth that make presentations a little easier for us to see. You are likely to receive comments and questions at hearings, and think about those as ways to improve. Their opportunities to get feedback for improving your presentation, and perhaps for modification of a motion that might be brought under your article if some tweaking seems like it is going to better meet with public support for the article. And then the motion will have to be submitted by the deadline. I don't believe we've set that for this year yet. Perhaps we have. And again, the motion is what we act on at town meeting. Motion needs to be within the scope of the article, which can't have surprises to the voting public on what exactly is going to be taken up at town meeting. So any motion made has to be properly within the notice that was given about what will be taken up. Town council does review all of our motions. And in general, our motions that are under 100 words are presented on a first and last PowerPoint slide at town meeting, and anything over 100 words needs to be printed on a handout. And that is just because you can't read it on the screen if it's more than 100 words. And then what is projected on the screen would be moved as printed in the handout, and everyone knows they should be looking for a handout for this motion. Again, there are, we need advanced submission of PowerPoints and handouts. There are guidelines. I review every single presentation and give people feedback and comments. The authorship of presentations does belong to presenters and committees, but I will make suggestions to you. We preload, as I mentioned, all of the PowerPoint presentations on the town's computers for projection at town meeting. That enables us to run a more streamlined meeting and be a little faster. Handouts need to be copied double-sided on white paper, and you can be in touch with me before town meeting. I'll let you know how many people we expect to be in attendance on the night your article is coming up at town meeting. And then those handouts have to be delivered to the high school by 6 o'clock on the night that your article is likely to come up, or you can deliver your handouts to the town manager's office by noon on that day, and the town manager's office will bring your handouts to the meeting. If you are sponsoring an article, you'll receive notice of when the town meeting coordination meeting will happen. And at that meeting, we will have a list of we will create a list of all of our presenters so we know who we're looking for. And there will be requests made for speaking times and speaking times allotted. And They aren't always what's requested, so you're going to have to do your best. And the town clerk does notice all committees for meeting on all nights of town meeting. The open meeting law technically doesn't apply when committees are meeting at town meeting, but nonetheless, if the committee is going to be, for example, taking a vote on a recommendation on an amendment, which you can't know about in advance of town meeting, perhaps, it's good to have a meeting called so that you're doing that within a properly called meeting. Okay, so when you're making a presentation to town meeting, really important to actually stand in front of the mirror or get your spouse to sit at the table and let you do the presentation, time yourself. And there is a video tutorial on speaking at town meeting that Erin Stevens created, and it's lovely to watch. She gives you some great tips about where to be vis-a-vis the microphone, et cetera. Now, if you're not sponsoring an article, committees and boards still have responsibilities connected with town meeting. First of all, you got to read the warrant and make sure that you have taken note of any article within the warrant that is within your committee's charge. If it's a topic that fits within what your committee does in town. And if it does, you want to be sure that you place a discussion of that article on one of your meeting agendas. If you think it's appropriate, you may wish to invite the article sponsor to that meeting to talk with you about the article. It's a great idea to invite and consider public comment. This is all with the goal of coming up with your committee or board's recommendation for action, or deciding whether you want to make a recommendation for action on a motion under the article at town meeting. It's probably best practice to hold off making your board or committee's recommendation on an article until after the hearing has been held on that particular article, so that any new information that comes up at that hearing is also in your bucket of things to consider as you consider a recommendation. So if there are articles at town meeting that are within your committee's scope, it would be terrific to aim for robust attendance of your committee at the meeting. It often happens that there'll be questions from the audience that will come directly to your board or committee about what you think about this article or that article. If you do wish to make a statement at the hearing or at town meeting, then you need to have that statement prepared subject to the open meeting law. So as Kari has discussed, you can't be preparing a statement and circulating it by email for comments. You have to do that in the context of a posted meeting. If you are attending as a committee at the hearings pre-town meeting, it'll be important to notice a meeting of your committee that coincides with the date, time, and place of that hearing, so that if you do want to have any discussion as a committee at that hearing, you can do so. So your recommendation options are, you can recommend affirmative action, that's a yes vote. You can recommend no action, that's a no vote, or you can just not make a recommendation. Those are the choices. And if you are making a recommendation, you can request time to address the meeting from the moderator. You can ask the moderator to announce your recommendation without making any statement. You can prepare a handout on your recommendation. And it's also open to your committee to have a member of the committee come to a microphone on the floor and simply note that they are speaking for the thus and such committee, and they have a recommendation and they want to say a few words about the article. If you do want to address the meeting formally, it is important to come to that coordination meeting so we know that you want to do that and give you some time. And if you want your recommendation announced, you can send me that request. You can always find me at moderator@concordma.com. Now, the question was raised at the end of Kari's presentation about folks coming to speak in public settings, not as committee members, but as individuals. So this happens a lot at town meeting. And if you are a member of a board or a committee and you step up to a microphone on the floor of town meeting, chances are that folks attending town meeting know that you are a member of the Public Works Committee, the Planning Board, or what have you. And it's important to be clear, if you're not speaking for the committee, that you're not. And that way the community is not confused. Of course, you have, as a member of the voting public here in Concord, a right to get up and speak your individual view on the floor of town meeting. But it is important for people to understand that that's what you're doing, that you're not speaking on behalf of your committee. I do think that it is one of the sticky places is we have had on occasion a committee vote to recommend a particular action on a motion under an article, and a dissenter from that view come to a microphone on the floor of town meeting and speak as an individual against what their committee voted. In my view, that is not a best practice. It is, every individual has the right to do that, but it is confusing for the public to have members of a committee standing up and speaking against what a committee has done. The better practice is for a committee with a view that was a divided view to note that in their summary of a view to the meeting and indicate what the minority view was, but indicate that the majority, however, felt X, Y, Z. And that way that's taken care of. But that's my personal point of view on best practice there. But we don't have town rules on that. If you do want to distribute a handout, there are guidelines for the preparation of handouts. Again, send them to me in advance. Typically what we do is we have a website, an email address called tmsubmissions@concordma.gov. And that's where all of the pre-town meeting submissions go. And that has a pretty good circulation to me as well as members of town staff. So we make sure we don't miss anything, and we make sure that everything in its final form is loaded to the town's computers for presentation at the meeting. Okay. So Concord relies really heavily on boards and committees for so much of its good governance, and we're very grateful to all of you, and thank you very much. And I am going to stop there.
Thank you very much, Carmen. I know there was limited time and you covered a lot. Nick Pappas, do you have a question? Nick, you're on mute.
Okay, sorry. Carmen, it relates to the distinction between the articles and the motions. Articles can go on for pages, especially things like zoning changes. And can you give a sort of a simple example of how a motion for such a thing would be, sort of the outline of it or something?
Sure. So many times, especially if if an article has gone on for pages, if there aren't any changes to it that have happened through the hearing process, we can often simply have the motion be moved as printed in the warrant. And that is fine. And we recognize that the warrant still has that or take any other action relative there to language in it, but town council has discussed that with us and is of the view that that's not a problem. If we move an article as printed in the warrant, that's fine as a matter of legal practice. If there's any kind of change to the language that's in the article, that has to be noted in a warrant. And we do sometimes have a long warrant article with a bunch of changes. And in order for people to understand what changed from the language of the warrant article, we'll have a red line printed up as the motion. And then that's a handout distribution so that people can see what that looks like. Other times there may be funding choices where several funding choices are identified in the article, but one of them is chosen by the time we get to town meeting. And in that case, the motion would need to specify what the funding source is. And sometimes funding amounts will have wiggled just a little bit. The general rule is they can't wiggle more than about 10% and still be within the scope of the warrant. I would say that that 10% rule doesn't apply when the numbers are really big. But so those are kind of the general rules on motions under articles, but they will vary in particular situations, and I'm always available to help discuss what a motion should look like.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Carmen. And thanks again for that presentation. I don't see any other questions and we are running late. So if you have additional questions, I know Carmen is very happy to speak with you offline. And we are now going to go to our last session, which was requested by one of the committees. I can't remember which one, but we have added on this brief presentation on cybersecurity. And Jason Bulger is with us today to quickly go over it. And I'm sure we'll go a little bit over 11:30. If you cannot stay, you can watch this on the tape, which will be on MMN Media. And you can talk to Jason offline as well. Okay, Jason.
Thank you, Terry. Can everyone see my screen now? All right, so I am Jason Bulger, the town's Chief Information Officer, and I'd like to welcome everyone here and express my appreciation for your participation in town government. I've given a few presentations so far on sort of what the town is doing to protect itself for cybersecurity, but today I thought I would spend a little bit of time talking about what everyone here can do to protect against a cyber attack. So I'm actually going to focus on the top threat to our users, and that includes everyone here, what you're going to face and what you can do about it. So if you could just envision in your head what you think the enemy looks like, the person or individual who is trying to get into Town of Concord systems or your personal email. When I did this exercise initially, I might have thought of somebody like this, a programmer, a coder who's going through lines of an application trying to find a vulnerability and deconstruct it so that they can hack into something. This is kind of what the media portrays in TV and movies as to how people break into things. But in fact, this is far less common an attack vector these days. In fact, what the enemy does look like is probably something more like this. People who have absolutely no programming skills, maybe in a call center or doing research online. And the type of attack that I'm referring to here is a social engineering attack. So social engineering is any type of attack that exploits human error, right, to gain access to something. So an example of this is phishing or spear phishing. You probably all get emails, you know, in your inbox that are from people you don't know, encouraging you to click random links. That is phishing. Spear phishing is a targeted attempt. So rather than just sent to, say, hundreds or thousands of users, they understand who you are and what type of information you might have, and then they look to use that information to gain access to something. So a Verizon study that came out this year of cyber attacks and breaches, of over 4,000 breaches actually, found that 85% of them involved a human element. And of those, 43% started as social engineering attacks, which was the largest vector. One other thing I'll point out, I've learned recently, another term is whaling. So you've got phishing, spear phishing, and whaling. Whaling is going after the high level targets within an organization like a CEO or CFO. So let me just show you a quick example of something that happened very recently. This is the town of Peterborough, New Hampshire. And in August of this year, it was announced that Peterborough was hacked out of $2.3 million in a classic social engineering scheme. Now, you know, the headline is always hacked. And again, we call up that notion of a programmer who is trying to break into systems, but this attack actually illustrates what I'm talking about. So routinely, the town made a $1.2 million transfer to the school district for busing and other fees. And they were also in the middle of a large construction project where they had to make routine financial transfers to a contractor. One of the members of the finance team received an email asking them to update the ACH information for that month's transfer. And they made the changes and then sent $2.3 million to an unauthorized third party. As soon as these transfers were made, they took the money out of the bank account and transferred it into cryptocurrency, and they do not think they'll be able to recover that money. Also, because the transfer was made willingly by staff, their insurance is not at this point covering that. So it's going to be a direct loss for the town. So you can see that there are real world implications for these types of attacks. And, you know, I think sometimes we read about these things and we think, you know, this would never happen to us, or I would never do that. But I think before we throw stones in our glass house, you have to remember that these are not just, you know, random emails that people receive. These are professionals who now will look to find out all the information they possibly can about an individual or a team, understand the organization, and then craft a way to sort of get into a system or gain access to something that they wouldn't otherwise. You know, back in the day, we'd get emails from Nigerian princes, and we've all learned to discern, you know, far-fetched promises of money from actual requests. But these days, it's getting much more difficult to determine those. The other thing you want to think about is that the information that social engineers need to get into a system is what we release on the internet. And a business might release far less than a public organization like the town of Concord that by law and also as a best practice tries to get as much information to the public as possible. So how can we protect ourselves? The first thing is to just be aware that this happens. Not only does it happen in Peterborough, but we get phishing emails and spear phishing emails routinely in the town of Concord. And that will include some of you board and committee members. It's important to double check with a third party anytime you get something suspicious. So if you get a request that seems unusual or is outside of the bounds or claims to be coming from somebody's personal email account rather than their official town email account, it's always best to pick up the phone or reach back out to that individual or another third party just to make sure that they really initiated the contact. The next thing you can do is make sure you have controls in place to prevent abuse. You know, in addition to receiving a message, you want to make sure that any process change results in going through certain steps that can prevent those types of abuse. So in the case of Peterborough, you know, when they received that request, it should have gone to several people to vet, and they should have looked to make sure that the account numbers were valid and reached out to these individuals. But those protocols either didn't exist or they weren't followed. So wherever you can think of additional controls to prevent abuse, those should be in place. You also want to make sure you provide routine training to users. So that's what we're doing right now, right? Extending training to some board and committee members. We try to do this with our staff as well, both in terms of cybersecurity awareness training, but also every day that you have an opportunity to explain to someone where there might be an attack or an intrusion. And also test those users. We do phishing tests for our employees, but it's not always feasible to do social engineering tests. You know, they can be pretty complicated. I think of this as, you know, my wife and I always talk about, can we have a stranger come up to our kids and see if they would really go with them to make sure they're listening to our advice. But you don't necessarily need to follow through with a test to that level, but you can always stop and ask your employees or your board and committee members, out of curiosity, if you got an email asking you to do this, what would you do? Or who would you contact? Or how would you make sure that it was legitimate? And the last thing I've got here is to understand that all information can be used in an attack. As I mentioned, the town puts out a lot of information. Board and committee members are encouraged to put minutes out there, meeting packets. All of these things contain information that can be used against us. So I'm not recommending that we, you know, not put out as much as we are. We need to. That's part of being a town following the law, but also doing good best practices. But we do want to keep in mind that the information that we might think of as not many people having is possibly on the internet. So when somebody calls and says they're from this company and they seem to have a lot of information, just make sure you maintain a high level of scrutiny on that. And finally, where can you go? You know, if anybody here watching this can always reach out to the IT department. I've got an email address here. You can find more contact information on the website. Always reach out through the town manager's office or the select board if you have a question or a problem. We're happy to help, even if it seems ridiculous or far-fetched. We'd much rather spend time helping users, vet properly and educate them than find out after the fact that somebody wasn't quite sure and they just didn't want to bother us. So it's never a bother. We're always happy to help. And with that, I'll open it up to questions.
Thank you so much, Jason. That's such a good point. I know that Kari and Carmen and Chris Carmody and the Attorney General's office all feel the same way. It's better to ask the questions. These things can be complex. Don't be shy about asking your questions. I'm really glad you brought that up. And thanks for condensing all that material in a very brief time. So we do, I guess, have time for a few questions, if there are any. And of course, you can always talk to Jason offline, as he just said. I'm also reminding everybody that all of today's materials will be posted on the website in the town clerk section of the webpage. And I again want to thank every single member who's attended today and who serves the town of Concord. Without you, we really would not have such an active and progressive community. And you are really the workhorses of the community. We thank all of you. So I see Carmen has her hand up, and then Stephen Bader.
I just wanted to note how much I have appreciated taking the town's cybersecurity training. I'm one of the people who's ended up getting it, and it's just been so wonderfully useful to see all of the little tricks that folks can use to try and trick you into clicking on things or going to a website that's not where you think you're going. So thank you for that.
Yeah, that's great feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Carmen. Stephen Bader.
So I've discovered that I routinely get emails purportedly from another board member that are actually spoofs and say, you know, go here and buy some gift cards or something. Should I forward that to the support@concordma.gov email? I routinely click on it as report as spam to the email service, but they keep coming. But do you want to know about that as well?
Yeah, we're happy to help facilitate a solution to that. So sure, forward that to us.
Okay, thank you.
That happened to me also, Stephen, and you might want to email Jason and let him know specifically.
Okay, will do.
Other questions? Carmen, do you have another comment? Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I just failed to take my hand down.
Okay. Okay, thanks to everyone. I hope you have a wonderful Saturday, a wonderful weekend. Thanks again. And we'll see you all soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great presentations. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Very good.
Thank you.